All right, welcome to another show of Around the Coin. The three of us are here today. We have a few great conversations lined up. This is Mike Townsend speaking. I'll pass it to Brian to introduce yourself, give a quick word, and then we'll dive right in with Faisal.
Good morning, folks. Wonderful to be here. Wonderful to be with you guys today. And I think we're going to have an excited conversation today.
And good morning. My name is Faisal Khan, and we were having a great pre-show conversation. One of the things we were thinking about is Patreon. Offerings. It was suggested that we have a Patreon page or a Patreon, what have you. And for those who don't know what Patreon is, it is where you can, offer something extra to your members, and they can make a donation and so forth, and people make a living out of it, etc. But one conversation that came up was, how do we handle something like this? Because we talk a lot of, what's the right word here, guys? Is it controversial? Not controversial. I guess things that are not talked about in mainstream without being labeled. All three of us are, I would say, open-minded gentlemen. We are not left or right or center or what have you. We're just open-minded, and we can take an opinion or understand the other person's point of view. And the question was, if we start allowing members to listen to our pre-podcast recording or, come in live and listen to it, would Patreon do anything like that? Because Patreon recently has been shutting down accounts for all the, I guess it's far right. Is that what it's going for?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, that would.
I'm not sure it's just that. I mean, and I don't know if our podcast would qualify for that. We're not even politically aligned to anything.
I'm not saying we are there, but I was just talking about Patreon itself. What's been going on with them recently? Because it's a great payment platform for something like this, for makers, for people who make content or who make things, etc.
Well, it's my view, Faisal, that we are going through a period of time where the pendulum swings back and forth. And if you were to look at the arc of the internet when it first started, it was everybody contributing their first person knowledge, their insights, their ideas, their personality into this ether. And Quora was one of those amazing extensions of that. It was this idea that we can share knowledge and information with some judgment, but in reality, you still had a platform to share your views. What has happened since then, irregardless of how it's being labeled today, is that we have people who have appointed themselves as the arbiter of what is the right information and what is the wrong information. And that's the terminology I'm going to use. They use other terms, but it really comes down to what's right and what's wrong. And the reality is, today they go after the low-hanging fruit. And that's what's always happened whenever there's censorship, any form of censorship. They go after low-hanging fruit where essentially everybody can agree upon. Generally, it's locked up in the terminology of hate or hurtful or destructive. The church during the Inquisition did the same thing. I can go back in time. Anybody who studied history knows exactly what I'm talking about. All you need to do is study the cycles of human endeavors, and it has not changed one iota. It is just a different formality. It's a different format. Instead of burning books, you deplatform and you burn that individual. There are foreign governments right now that are going to require you to have a social rating. And we just kind of chuckle, oh, that's kind of cool. And when you don't understand the impact that this has had in history, everything just seems new. It just seems like, oh, that's cool because it's got a patina of technology wrapped around it, and it's disruptive. But in reality, it's exactly the same thing. It is creating a narrative that fits whoever is the narrative creator at that time, and knocking out whatever is not central to that narrative. And the last time that was really effective, and it was exceedingly effective, was about 1,000 odd years ago, and we entered into 1,000 years of dark ages. And the reality is there's nothing that says that won't happen again. We thought we were enlightened. If you were to go to the Macedonian and the Greek culture just before, or the Egyptian or the Alexandrian culture was one of the most tolerant cultures on the planet at the time. And they had every race, every creed, every religion right there in Alexandria. Every one of them were all coexisting until one of them decided that they had the better truth and everybody else didn't have the right truth. And all of a sudden, people's fear factor clicked in, and that is, I better align with one side or the other because somebody made a bifurcation, and that bifurcation is either you're with us or you're against us. And so quickly, that cosmopolitan society of tolerance turned into a society of intolerance where you could not speak your mind, you could not publish, and you were deplatformed. And back then, a deplatforming was your works were burned and you were hung. And today, we just do it in a different way.
Yeah, today. So, for instance, we're speaking about platforms such as Patreon, YouTube, Apple. These are the
Google.
platform, and there's others as well. Yeah,
Facebook,
Google as well.
Twitter,
Instagram. These are the ones that carry the voices. They're not putting out messages themselves explicitly. They may have their own channel, but they're certainly not driving any significant voice. But they're the platform.
Well, actually, they
that
are.
Everyone speaks on.
See, here's the slippery slope. When these platforms truly were just conveyors of whatever was out there, they were not editors. They were just simply platforms. It is abundantly obvious and 100% patently false to say that these platforms today do not create content or steer content as a falsehood.
Well, that's the movement we're going into, right?
Well, it's already happened. The moment you
it's happening. It's a process that's beginning to happen. So, even in the last 5 years, they have ramped up the enforcement of anti-feminist, anti-hate speeches, and as the shift of power influence goes from TV and radio and newspaper to Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, well, then those forces, say YouTube, et cetera, the online social media platforms, they've started to make decisions. They've started to ban people, influential people. And so I think the rub specifically is, hey, you look at people who have large audiences, people who just literally looking at the numbers, somebody like Alex Jones or another guy, Milo Yiannopoulos is one that was banned from YouTube recently. These guys have a lot of people. So the question is, how do they get to have such large audiences? Are they somehow attracting those audiences against the will of people?
We don't need to talk about any individual group or whatever, because that's just a lightning rod. It's irrelevant. But, the free market chooses what it chooses. And, if somebody has 1 million followers and another group says they don't deserve those 1 million followers because those 1 million people were deluded or drunk or dumb, then we've already created the problem in society that caused the destruction of organized society in the Dark Ages. Because essentially, people have the right to choose what they think and what they believe. And there is a common understanding that humans have free will. Right? But the reality is that's not what's really going on right now. You brought up, well, how did they get all of these followers? Because they're hate mongers, or how did this person get elected because he's this, or how could she get elected because she's that? I can flip this on any one of these, either or scenarios. It's irrelevant. The relevancy is that somebody is casting judgment on other people's decisions. And it's worrisome because people like George Orwell and others have really talked about this many, many years ago. In fact, it really goes back to Sumerian times. When the Sumerians created their first cuneiform writing, they said, the moment that you write something down, there is going to be somebody that will smash the tablet. And what that essentially means is when we only spoke to each other one-to-one, we're able to have a meeting of the minds. We're able to transfer knowledge and wisdom and information. And that's why some cultures from, let's just say there are groups of people throughout history, and some people are afraid of them, that would transfer their knowledge only through spoken word for very, very logical reasons. I will say one, which may be a lightning rod, I try not to do this, is alchemy. You know, a lot of folks said, oh, God, alchemy, yeah, that was replaced by chemistry and physics. It really wasn't. Alchemy was a complete understanding of a world system, and it was primarily encoded in symbolism and let's just call it
alchemy,
language.
say for instance, wasn't. Is your point that it was somehow banned from conversation by the platforms that existed at the time?
Yes. If you were to speak of any alchemical transformation of humanity, and a lot of it is very misunderstood on a mass scale at this point today. There's elements of alchemy that is not on the internet, is not talked about, and people think, oh, it's secret. It's secret because the moment you start understanding it, you'll start realizing why it was banned and why it would be banned today. And
okay, well, let me ask.
So we don't live. I guess the point I'm trying to make is we don't live in this imaginary, free and open exchange society. And I think it's the most important thing to realize, anybody listening to us at this moment, is that it is a delusion to think that's reality. I mean, we brought up a platform. YouTube is not just taking down hate speech. As of this week, they're taking down anything that does not fit into the mainstream understanding of science, technology, and culture. They will stop recommending those videos. They won't take them off, but they won't get advertising. They won't get monetized. They will essentially be lost with no links. And they're saying this because, well, somebody got mad because a video on the news of the day, right, as if somehow that is the fact of the day, that somebody's interpretation of events, followed a video that followed had some alternative theory to those news, and that was wrong. So, of course, Google and YouTube, being afraid of the repercussions, they said, oh, I know what we'll do. Anybody that comes up with ideas that are different from the mainstream, we're no longer going to promote their videos. They're no longer going to show up in your feeds. You're going to have to go and somehow figure out that they exist and find them in your search. And if they get a little too close to the edge, we're going to take them down anyway. So that's happening right now. That's happening
now. And effectively, if you take a step back and sort of think about it, you have people on the street who can say whatever they want, right? As long as you're not violating like physical assault laws, you have the ability to just have a conversation about whatever you want. Exactly. Now, if you make it online, you've got to use some tool, some protocol that has been built by some group of people. And the ones who have the platform now are companies. All of them, I think, are publicly traded companies. Yes. And so they have incentive to make money and to continue to exist and be relevant. You know, that's their core vein. That's their core goal, if you will, or their core consistent idea. Now, if you have people on there who are, Instagram has had a policy really since the beginning of no nudity, because they don't want the platform to slide into like some kind of porn place where people go and just look at nudes all day. And so that policy, Tumblr. I think, actually has been really. Yeah, maybe Tumblr, has gone that direction,
and so they porn, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's almost like, do you think it's the reality is, hey, human minds are, when we have sugar, when we have porn, when we have hate speech, it triggers something inside of us that's not our rational free will thinking.
I'll give you a parallel, and we'll go back to what Brian said, but the parallel is you look at the big banks, the big institutions. You look at the institutions, right? The company, corporate America, corporate, Europe, what have you, and you look at the small financial institutions. People trying to make a difference, people who are playing with cryptocurrency, playing with blockchain or other payment methods, and they get shut out of the larger financial system. It's the same discrimination, if you will, that is happening in the data side or in the free speech side or voicing your opinion on the thoughts that has already been happening now on the financial system. It's no different. And you really can't go, by the way, I disagree on that you can really go on the street and say, you really can't go start on the street and start talking about, and labeling people. No, there are repercussions. The question is, at what time, as a society, have to draw limits, because if you don't, you're no different than animals. You are no different.
Exactly.
That is why. But you have to draw limits. As a corporation, for profit, they didn't think about those limits, and now they're coming face to face with the monster. And what they're doing is they're playing snap. They're saying, okay, you know what? Majority, and how we gauge majority is again debatable and questionable. Majority of the people don't like this group, so we ought to ban them. But that is, I think, a knee-jerk reaction. And I think it's going to take a couple of iterations before they will get it right.
And I fully disagree that humans, if left to their own devices, will just fall apart and there'd be porn and drugs and people just be in the street. That is not the history of humanity. And anybody that promotes that at a high level, here's the first thing you should say. Either this person is manipulating you or they're stupid. Because humans self-organize in loving groups. They always have and they always will. The things that get in the middle are individuals that want to bifurcate those groups into sides. This has been the truth of history. Why am I saying this?
Brian, it will happen.
It will happen.
And it'll get bloody when it happens. Right? They're going on a killing spree.
Yeah. Let me explain why this happens. First off, let me demonstrate the fact of the truth of it. The fact that you and I exist today for millions of years of evolution, the fact that we exist today is proof that humans self-organize in loving groups. Okay, that's a fact, because if we didn't do that, we wouldn't be here. So what tears us apart? What tears us apart is the moment we decide that we need to smite somebody else's ideas, information, knowledge, and wisdom. The moment we do that, that's where it falls apart. When people have free expression, where there is no repression, there is free expression, right? When you have free expression that is not impinging upon my individual rights and liberties, then we have an organized, healthy society that brings us to the edges of growth, because every major growth in humanity came from the fringe, came from the people that YouTube will now edit, came from the people that Facebook will ultimately edit. Everything that is moving society forward was originally thought as insanity, crazy. Let's smite this guy. Okay, Albert Einstein was smited.
Let's take that argument. If YouTube does not have a 10,000 or 100,000 year head start that humanity does. They only have they've only been there for 10, 15 years, 20 years, not
exactly.
Even 20, right? So they're facing this environment, this scenario for the very first time. Let's say they'll get it wrong 10 times. Let's say we will eventually figure it out. I'm sure we had the same issue in a different context, in an analog context, way back in the 1800s, in the 1700s, and 1300s, and we figured it out. So they'll figure it out. But I think, right now, the popular opinion, and what is popular, is again very questionable, is that you need to be politically correct. You need to be, not lean towards the right. You can be center, you can be left, but certainly not right, and certainly not far right. You don't deserve a voice online. I for one absolutely disagree on that part, that you can snub someone out, and not because I like I said, I will always draw parallels to the industry I am in, which is the payments industry, and I hate it when banks and other large institutions have the right to simply, at a moment's notice, just okay, you are now excommunicated from the financial system. Likewise, a person who's spent thousands of hours, countless hours, building up an audience, putting up in content, no matter what the type of content is, and then at one go, they're gone. It's snuffed out. They don't have that. Think about that.
Faisal, let me just for the sake of argument, let me make the devil's advocate approach, and I just want to hear your reaction to it. So we've, in the United States, had this movement of civil rights, of feminist movement, of basically equalizing the laws such that there's no preference for one race or sex over another. Now, we did more than that. We, as in just the United States regulatory arm, where we said you can't even give preference to, you can't exclude someone because of what they look like or their sex, and you can't have segregated schools and restaurants and everything else, and that that is the way, the world we live in today. Now there's this debate, which is to say, hey, should private companies be allowed to scrutinize or segregate or chastise other people because of their views? And I wonder if this is, a future Supreme Court case where we say, does YouTube even have the right to ban people because of what they're talking about? In the same way that restaurants
take that same thing. What is happening is that a voice, whether right or wrong, left or right, center or top or down, whatever, positive or negative, is being aired. It is being aired, and it can be heard by people who stand there or choose to stand there to listen to it. Let me put it another way. If you put that same voice in a handwritten email and send it out over the U.S. postal system, is that allowed? Of course it's allowed. No one's going to question you on that. But the very minute you air it on a YouTube video or on Instagram, again, people who choose to stand there and listen to it are then being denied. That is, worrisome. I totally agree. I think it will be a U.S. Supreme Court case at some point in time.
Yeah, and Faisal, you make a really great point, and that is, I believe the only answer. This is the only answer in technology, and I'm really sorry to deliver this. The only answer is self-editing. This idea. Yeah, if you don't want to hear a message, you mute that message and you don't hear it. Now, I feel
totally agree on that. Totally agree on that.
I feel sorry for that person because I love hearing all ideas. I don't, as far as, now, can we agree that if somebody's being murdered or if somebody's being, things that every common society can agree upon, that you need to do something that is literally illegal? Yes. But other than that, instead of trying to edit what I see, give me a mute button, and then I can mute it so I don't see it. But don't tell me what I need to hear. Don't build me a browser.
I'll give you another
Don't
example.
build me a browser. They're building browsers with editing in there already, so I can't even go to a website. That's patently
like
wrong.
The news feed on Facebook. Sometimes we're okay. Sometimes we hate what a close friend or associate is posting because it sort of reveals the side of them that we don't know, and we just feel like just washing ourselves. And then sometimes we're okay because, hey, he posted a nice joke. So it's not pure black and white, and it seems like there seems to be a dial that's from 0 to 1, and it keeps moving every now and then, and it depends on how ugly it can get or not. And we expect companies to do something about it. We expect them to filter my feed because I don't like what I'm seeing. Well, I don't like what I'm seeing today on this Monday afternoon, but I may like what I may be seeing on a Wednesday morning, So how do companies do that? I don't think so. That, like I said, we will eventually figure it out, but I don't think so we have a solution right now. So the easiest thing is to look at, say, okay, what's bothering people the most? Oh, it seems to be this thing. Well, let's just shut them out. Again, I think snuffing a voice out because you don't agree or disagree to it, it's not fair. I don't think so, and I feel there are going to be serious repercussions going down the road.
Yeah, it seems like who are the people now sitting there? Picture 1 million people, and those people, they don't support any outside fringe views. But if only they were to hear this evil idea that all of a sudden they're going to flip the switch and then join this movement or somehow be hypnotized into it. That's where to me the rub is that if you allow people to completely say whatever they want on the internet, then who who, like, if I were to hear, I want to hear all the ideas, right? I don't want to be, I don't want my information feed to be filtered, right? I want to hear, all the way from the far left to the far right.
You are the filter, Mike. You're the filter.
I am the filter, and I just believe so strongly, not in myself and my special ability, but I believe in individual filters, right? You have your life, and
I'll give you an example you may relate to. You know the word Larry, the person Larry Flint.
Yeah.
Okay, Brian is laughing because he was a guy who ran this porn magazine called Hustler, and he used to do some really vile, in the words of many, cartoons and setups or what have you, porn related, needless to say, of people. And he got sued by a guy called Jerry Falwell, and he took him to the Supreme Court. And you know what? It was one of those rare decisions where the Supreme Court said, you know what? Nope, this is right. He's okay. Hustler is okay, because they have the right to publish whatever the hell they want. It's up to you not to buy that, but they have the right to publish whatever they want. I feel we're going to see something very similar to Larry Flint's case, where, I don't know, the InfoWars guys or whoever it is will go there and say, listen, I could be talking garbage, but it's a matter of opinion, right? So what is hard rock? It's just a matter of opinion. What is heavy metal? It's just a matter of opinion. So why is it that my opinion gets more severity whilst the others ones don't? So I think I think you will go win. That's my
I
prediction.
think it's important. I think it's important to understand that this is not about political speech as much as it is just about speech individually. I don't subscribe to any particular site or political views or this or that. And as far as I'm concerned, these are all part of a general idea that people can get to choose on their own what is important and what is not important. And it gets quickly distilled down to Milo or InfoWars or anything like that, and that's irrelevant. That just happens to be the low-hanging fruit on the tree. It keeps expanding, and today you might fit that agenda. Today you might say, well, they deserve it. Fine, they came after them. This time you said nothing. They're going to come after somebody else. Next time you said nothing. When they come after you, there will be nobody, right? And this is what happens when there is a form of censorship, when you're taking away the ability for people to freely exercise. They're not going to stop freely exercising. It just gets sub rosa. It gets underground. And there are people who transfer knowledge and wisdom for thousands of years that will never put it on the internet. And a lot of people laugh and they just say, that's not possible. I can tell you as a fact that there's a tremendous amount of knowledge and wisdom that has never touched the internet. It doesn't even have a shadow of what it is, because these individuals studied history long enough and humanity long enough to know that these cycles exist and that they will ultimately pay the price if that were ever to be released. And I can tell you that when the Greeks took over Egypt, the Greeks thought that they got the wisdom of the Egyptians. And in reality, they got nothing. They got nothing out of it. And they installed themselves as pharaohs and, all of this other stuff. Cleopatra, she thought she was Egyptian. She was raised in Greece. And a lot of people think that that's the height of Egyptian. The Egyptians hold knowledge and information and wisdom that we have not even heard of yet. And that is sad for me. And I'm not the guy to bring it. All I'm saying is you want to learn and dig deep enough. There is information out there that has never been published, but it's going to take you to go to these places, find wisdom keepers, dig through their knowledge, and then a ton of bricks will fall on your head and say, now I get it. Now I see why Brian sounds a little anxious, a little agitated, and when he realizes that we're going through yet another cycle of editing.
But it
has nothing to do with Egypt. It has to do with the fact that there's information, and this is not a conspiracy. Please don't use the word conspiracy and hidden knowledge, secret society, blah, blah, blah. That's fun. It's great cartoons. But if you really care about your life, your kids, your future, think about the fact that we do not live in a world today, as enlightened as it is, where you can freely express the information, history, and knowledge of humanity. We do not live in that world today. It's heartbreaking to me. I want to wake up in that world with all the technology we have to say that we do, but we don't. And if anything, the pendulum is swinging the other way. We're decidedly going in another direction, and the pitchforks and torches and tar and feather is out, and watch what happens.
Well, I think that the debate would be to say, similar to what I was speaking of earlier around the civil rights movement, is that from a pure, say, libertarian viewpoint, where anyone could speak whatever they want, there's an open platform, private companies can do what they please as long as they don't physically hurt or constrain anyone, that there are some, basically the ends justify the means argument would be to say that there are some ideas that are so dangerous to society, like
what are
segregation, segregation.
What ideas are dangerous? Now, I'm not talking about actions.
No,
name one idea that is dangerous.
The idea that
those are ideas. Ideas don't do anything. Actions do things.
Right,
in fact, if you want to study just how ugly an idea is, like segregation, you study the people that practiced it. You go into their mind. You read what they wrote. You want to understand killing one race of people? Go in the mind of Adolf Hitler. Don't burn his books. Let people study it and see what's really going on in his mind. And I'll tell you what will happen. I'll tell you what will happen is most people, not everybody, some people will go crazy, whatever. They're going to go crazy anyway. But most people will walk away with a new set of a mandate to say, I understand now what really went wrong. I understand what the craziness really was. And now I know why we should never go back and never again. But you can't do that just by making it a sort of a cartoon. And a no-touch subject. That's not how history has ever been learned. That's not how society learns. Society needs to go back and study the things that made us go wrong so that we all know it instinctively.
Yeah, I agree. Yes,
so it's not the ideas, it's the actions. Lessons. So there are no bad ideas. And then the moment we start judging the bad idea, then we have to create an editor. And who is that editor?
There are bad ideas. There are definitely bad ideas.
What are they? Let's name them.
You could just go down a list of ideas that are just
all these ideas
terrible.
Are
idea is bad.
Actions are bad.
Right,
but I don't agree with the ideas. I'm not defending them.
It depends how deep you want to go philosophically. But to say that if the end goal is to have a society that functions and that humans exist and that there's not endless suffering and
look at the ugly ideas.
Then there are ideas that help you. Right. And so I think the ideas of...
How could you know what the ugly idea is unless you speak of it? See, this is where the editing problem...
You can begin to identify what a society that we don't want to live in looks like. Reference Hitler. Those are the kinds of patterns that we don't want to emulate.
How do we know what that pattern is? How do we know what that pattern is?
If Google was on the podcast right now, they would say, hey, we don't even want to start the snowball rolling of hatred. We don't want to start racism. We don't want to start anti-feminist. We don't want to start dangerous ideas and give them enough snowball momentum such that they attract other people.
What we're saying is humans are inherently evil. They're going to snowball if you give them the idea that's bad. Our fellow man, our fellow woman around us, they're so ugly and so disenchanted that if we just put out the idea that one race is better than another and we need to snuff it out, that somehow that's going to snowball and happen. Guess what? It's never happened. Temporarily it's happened, but it's never happened firmly throughout society. Why? Because we're here and we're freer than we have been, right? So now the question is, did those bad ideas help us or did they hurt us? Now, in a grand scheme of things, one could argue that the body needs to get a virus. It needs to get sick to fortify its immune system. And humanity may be fortifying its immune system by the bad idea, by being faced with it, by having to face your own humanity, your own racism, your own hatred, because everybody has biases, and now they have to make determinations. Are these biases racist? Or are they biases for reality? And you need to be able to discover this. You need to be able to discuss it freely. The moment you smite somebody. Go ahead.
Well, I think where people would, I think the general viewpoint against that, if there were to be, a seesaw and say the other side is going to say this, they would say that the line to go between ideas of disagreement to physical actions of immoral attitudes, Hitler moved into physical physical areas of immoral behavior.
Exactly.
Right? There was just things that were done that were physically absolutely immoral, and those were different. Those stemmed from ideas. And
everybody
so
could have read his book, right?
Right. And so people on the other side would say, hey, you want to stop those ideas from snowballing before they get so powerful that they become physical manifestations of hatred, of physical violence. And
so you're saying that that humanity is so dumb that somehow if we even introduce the idea that one race is inferior, that somehow too many people will believe in that. I don't believe that. I believe.
No. Let me rephrase it.
Can do that.
I just want to give you the correct argument, so you can give a proper rebuttal. It would be to say that humans are born so open-minded and such a blank slate that when they're introduced with such powerful ideas that many people around them believe, that they're subject to believing those with limited information. That they are imperfect beings that are evolved over millions of years, and they have strong tendencies to act in survivalism, tribalism, addiction to sex, addiction to sugar, addiction to drugs, which really stem from traumas. So people experience deep pain, and
so
to
where
get
do the
through that
traumas
pain,
come from? Where do human traumas originate from?
I mean, that's a whole different view, a whole different area.
Actually,
those would be.
It comes from repression. If you study human psychology, all human traumas come from repression, all of them. Some form of repression, and we can even say violence is a form of repression. Neglect is a form of repression. It all comes from being repressed as a child. So, I mean, we can go down to square one, but I mean, the reality is that I'm not just this is not a hot take. It's not a quip. Studied it for over 50 years. The basic premise is this simple. The idea is never bad. The idea just exists. The person could be bad, could be, whatever. But, if you take a few steps back and you say, okay, do we us, the three of us, agree that some forms of speech are really, let's call it repugnant, objectionable? Yeah, we can, as the three of us can agree it. Our small groups, our cities, our communities. But on a universal scale, I don't think that's possible, because then you're voting in somebody to start making the choices to say, I don't think you need to hear this. You shouldn't hear this. And that becomes a slippery slope. And it always goes down the slope. It always goes down. Well, we can all agree on this idea, but this idea, then this idea, and now that's where we are.
It feels like this is just an eternal struggle of human survival. It's like I feel like people literally been debating this exact topic for thousands and thousands of years, which is, how do you filter and how do you allow certain ideas to be prevalent in society? And
I think it's self-apparent what we did. We survived. So what I'm saying is that we've not only survived the bad ideas, whatever they were, we survived the physical actions that that sort of culminated from those bad ideas. And we went, there's no doubt, don't get me wrong, we've been diluted as groups of people into following leaders that hypnotized us, but that only happened because there was a lack of open information. If there was equal open information that everybody could examine, and it wasn't edited information, you could actually see the underpinnings of a philosophy, even if you are, quote unquote, not very smart. It's very easy to telltale sign when you're dealing with somebody who is destructive. And if you can have open access, then you can start creating a thesis on what this person is about. We're not going in that direction. If anything, you're kind of saying what a lot of people are saying, and it sounds great. It sounds humans are inherently bad. We're imperfect.
No. I mean, no one's going to say there's inherently a bad thing. I think in humans are inherently neutral, and that with presented with ideas that make sense to their matrix of reality, then they roll with those ideas. And if those ideas allow them to feel better about explaining their way of life. Hey, I'm living a terrible life by my own self-assessment, and this is how I'm going to rationalize it, is that someone else is taking something from me, or someone else is doing something wrong that's causing me to live this way. And then you develop a sense of hatred and tribalism, and then that's steamrolls.
And how do you neutralize that? You neutralize it for the same reason the wall came down in the former Soviet Union. Right? The wall came down because of access to information. The way you neutralize this feeling that somebody is hurting me, you give them the information where they can see, not propaganda. You give them the information to see, no, they aren't. When a lot of the people in the former Soviet bloc realized that they had access to the beginnings of the electronic medium, and ultimately the internet would have totally destroyed it, they started seeing, well, hold it, the West isn't exactly what our leaders told us it was. They were editing the information that we were being protected from, this debased culture. And in reality, once they saw that reality wasn't what was being presented to them, they tore the wall down. And this is the problem with any society. Whenever you see people from
it's almost like love eventually can just overpower.
Humanity's going to overcome all of this.
There's a great documentary by Dia Khan that is fantastic. This Muslim woman just basically walks in these white supremacists' front door and completely disarms them with her, brilliance and her beauty and her ability to connect with them. And by the end of it, they've completely moved on from their beliefs of white supremacy, and they, really express a lot of love and gratitude for her. So that just shows you, love can overpower.
And the thing is, you can find the same people in the West. We find certain comic book cutouts that we look at.
I'm curious. I want to almost point it towards Faisal for a moment to say what areas, what other ideas that we may not see, but living in the United States bubble that we're in, that are circulating your part of the world, or what you see being in Istanbul in terms of debates now that are hot topics of a similar vein?
Well, I'm not going to talk about what happens in Istanbul or not, but I'll tell you one thing. Barring the United States, free speech is not so free anymore, right? I mean, I was just reading something. If everything was so free, then they wouldn't have rules and laws. There are rules and laws, and, Belgium has certain, censorship. So does France and Germany and Russia and certainly Turkey and Pakistan and India and Saudi Arabia and South Africa. They even Japan, even Thailand has it. So they all have some form of censorship. I think absolute free speech is a utopian endeavor. And if you don't believe me, and you say, well, it happens in the United States, well, I beg to differ. The start of this conversation, what was happening with the far rights, etc., is exactly that. You can't just go and use a derogatory term for someone who is, let's say, of the other sex or in between sexes or what have you, or has a different sexual preference. And if you use such lewd or derogatory comments, you would be, ostracized, you would be punished, you would be fined, you would have consequences. Well, the person could cite, well, that's free speech. Well, no, we have a law against that kind of free speech. So there is censorship, right? It exists in many forms and ways and so forth. But unfortunately, gentlemen, we'll have to put this to rest because we have very few, minutes left. And I do want to talk about the upcoming conferences because this is, after all, payments and a banking and a fintech and blockchain kind of a podcast. But so, we all know about the famous conferences like Money 2020 and so forth. And, Money 2020 is really up on that list. But maybe we could pass the mic around and talk about maybe 2 or 3 conferences that you feel are really, really good. I will start with 3 of my recommendations. I feel that the IMTC conference that happens in Miami, and IMTC is the International Money Transfer Conference, is something that is worth attending. The other one that I will be attending for the first time, but I have been following it up for a long, long time, is Transact. That happens by the Electronic Transaction Association, the NACHA conference that happens in Vegas. And the third conference, if I had to give one, would probably be... well, Well, I'll give you the third one. Let me just think about, I mean, I have a few candidates, but let me throw the mic to Brian. Brian, your conferences.
I agree with all the conferences. I would highlight two. The ETA or Transact conference is interesting because you have the people actually on the ground running that are selling these payment services in the United States, and they are empirically much more aware than some of the folks that tend to talk about it more in theory. So I love that conference. I love to get caught up with what is actually really taking place in the market. Money 2020, of course, any of the events around the world are incredible networking events. The great educational events. You can kind of see the insights. There's numbers of Bitcoin events. They kind of fluctuate. I can't say any particular event has been consistently working. They kind of fluctuate. And
they're all so new.
Yeah, they're new. Some of them are older. Some of them are 5 years old.
Well, there's consensus, right? That happens in New York.
Yeah, that's interesting. But what I can say, it's going to be interesting because we're in the perfect cycle right now, the down cycle of cryptocurrency. The sky is falling, at the end is near, and so now we're going to start seeing the people who have
which culls a lot
real
of
backbone.
which culls a lot of the conferences that we're in.
I love it.
Right?
Yeah.
But third conference and maybe a fourth one. There's a conference that happens in San Francisco. It used to be in Florida. It's called CNP Card Not Present. Great conference if you're in the online CNP merchant space. There is a really, really good one that happens in Miami. It's done by FIBA, which is the Florida International Bankers Association. This is a very, very boutique conference. FIBA does their AML conference. So it's happening in March. I'll be there, by the way. About 1,500 to 1,800 bankers from South America to Latin America, the Caribbean will come over there. Part of their AML, anti-money laundering conference, etc., but really something worthwhile checking out. So FIBA conference definitely there on that list.
Yeah, I agree. Mm-hmm. The whole thing about conferences, and I think, Faisal, you've talked about this quite a bit, is really the ability to link up with other folks and to actually meet them face to face, to hear about the things that you probably aren't going to hear about any other venue. And it gives you sort of the motivation of what's really driving these people.
And I'll tell you one thing, so it is about meeting people. You've seen someone post on LinkedIn day in, day out. You've seen someone's, presentation, or someone from somewhere else. But when you actually see them face to face, in person, it's just so different. You could say, "Oh my God, didn't know
it's
he
fun."
was." There are two ways about it, right? So there's one way. "Oh my God, I didn't know he was such an asshole in real life." Well, it happens. Trust me, it happens.
Who are you talking about?
Exactly, right. And the other way was like, you could say, "Hey, I was a fan of the person as a professional that he is or she is." But I'm now even much more a fan of that person because of he or she as a human being that they are, because you get to see the human side of them,
the dimensions.
Right? I know I've seen people, who are so big in the industry and yet so very humble. I would give a shout out to two people. One is Brad Garlinghouse of Ripple. You can go and approach him and stop and say, "Hey, can I take a picture with you?" And, absolutely. He would stop, he would take a picture. This is the guy who comes with his own security detail, by the way, at a conference. I don't know why, but he does. And the other person was one of the founders of a TransferWise. I'm forgetting his name right now, but, he was walking on the conference so many times. I stopped and, took a picture. He actually put his things down, moves in, huddles up, smiles, he take a picture, etc. A guy whose time is extremely valuable. So I think conferences give you this side of humanity that otherwise you don't get. But these are definitely, if you are coming to a conference, please do make sure that you attend and let us know. Or if you have a conference that you would like to promote, write to us, let us know, and we'll be happy to look into it.
All right. Yeah. We really are going to start promoting more and more interesting companies, conferences.
Any conferences?
You guys, boy, you guys did such a great job. ETS or ETA and Consensus, Buddy 2020. I mean, those are the big ones that I think really are worth attending. The nice thing about cryptocurrency conferences, banking as well, is that they're just so distributed across the world. So it almost, in some sense, matters that you just go to some of them. Go to something that's semi-local or something that you can get to, and just participate. Meet people and dive in. And so much of the advice depends on what situation you're in. Whether you're starting a company, want to start a company, want to join a company, want to invest in companies. So, message us if you have any thoughts or suggestions or topics that you want us to touch on for next show. If you want to join the show, let us know. We're very open and want to continue to make interesting content and have interesting conversations. So until next time, guys, have a great week, and we will talk to you soon.
Awesome.
Take
Thank
care.
you, guys.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
The views and opinions expressed on any program are those of the hosts, co-hosts, and guests appearing on the show and do not necessarily reflect the view of the owners and producers of the show. Paid advertisements in form of audio announcements may appear throughout the show, including this one. Advertising can also include print and other digital formats. The owners and producers of Around the Coin do not endorse or evaluate the advertised product, service, or company, nor any of the claims made by the advertisement. All programs are subject to a one-time charge for professional editing fees, for which the interviewing guest or guests may have contributed towards. The owners, producers, hosts, co-hosts, and guests on the show are not financial advisors. Any investment advice or opinions cited during the show is for information purposes only. None of the content is intended to be investment advice. Seek a duly licensed professional for investment advice. If you believe there's been any violation of your copyright, trademark, service mark, or any other type of intellectual property, please inform us in writing by sending an email to legal@aroundthecoin.com.